Battle of the Network shows, a Brooks Michaels production, starring Rick Brooks, Mike Kogel, also starring Lemmy Cat, Teddy, and Mocha, with guest stars Burt Reynolds, Norman Fell, Mickey Rooney, Billy D. Williams. Tonight's episode, Dan August. Battle of the Network shows. Join Rick Brooks and Mike Kogel as they explore the TV of the 70s and 80s through hand-picked episodes of their favorite and not-so-favorite series.
Welcome to Battle of the Network shows. I'm Mike.
And I'm Rick. Hello, everyone.
And today we're talking about, again, we mentioned this with All in the Family, a little surprising that it took that long to get to that. Mm-hmm. Talking about our first Quinn Martin show.
Yeah, finally.
Finally, yeah. Of the 10,000 shows he had.
Yeah.
You know, I looked that up. He really didn't have as many shows as you'd think.
That's true.
He had some sort of record, right? There was one on the air, at least one on the air every year for 20 years or something. But
that makes sense. He had a solid record,
yeah.
But he was never like really prolific.
Right.
He seemed to it was more focusing on maybe one or two shows at a time. But yeah, what a great run. But like you said, yeah, it's not like he carpet bombed the airwaves like Norman Lear did in the 70s.
Right, yeah. But like 20-something shows. That's a good run, especially since he stopped in the early 80s. So.
That's right, yeah. And a lot of his shows, I think, are kind of in our wheelhouse.
Yeah.
Of the types of shows that we like and that we've talked about, and maybe that has something to do with it. In past seasons, we've covered similar programs, and to avoid doubling up, Quinn's had to wait a little bit. But
yeah,
today is Quinn Martin's day.
Yes, and the show we're talking about, we mentioned, and at least I learned about for the first time when we did the first ever Pick Your Pine way back when as part of a regular episode.
Yes, I'll put that link to that in the show notes because it's a little bit harder to find because it was appended to a regular episode.
That's right. And it was a show that Robert Pine and Norman Fell had been in together, which was this show, Dan August.
Yeah, and that you hear that and it raised your eyebrows like, well, what is this show? And why am I not watching it right now?
Right. I mean, first you hear, and then you find out the star of it is Burt Reynolds.
Yes.
And you're like, why do I not even know this show exists?
Well, one reason, I know that's kind of a rhetorical question, but one reason is somehow we chose for our first Quinn Martin program one of his least successful programs that he did in 20-some years of producing.
Right, and maybe one of Burt Reynolds' least successful products.
That's right.
I mean, he had a lot of ups, but he did have a lot of downs, too. So
he certainly did.
This probably had a bigger audience than Cop and a Half.
I think that's a safe bet, yes.
Yeah.
I was actually thinking about that. Well, here we can stick in the obligatory comment, which actually bothers me when people do it, but I'm going to do it now. It's like, well, Dan August was doing a 12.3 rating back in 19...
Right.
People would kill for a 12.3 rating now.
Of course.
It's like, well, it's a totally different world, but, But, yeah, Dan August only lasted one season.
And can you imagine, I mean, if it had been a success, maybe no Burt as we know Burt.
That's right.
Maybe no Mr. Roper.
That's possible, yes.
At least as we know Mr. Roper.
Yeah.
Someone else would have played Oscar on the $6 Million Man.
Yeah, you're right.
And Ned Romero, he did a lot of stuff too.
He
that
did?
Maybe he wouldn't have done.
So this is like, Dan August is like the nexus point for all of pop culture that came for the next 20 years at least.
That's right, saying. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I think you're right.
It's definitely like a branching timeline.
Yeah. Uh-oh.
A what if?
Are we working towards Crisis on Infinite Quinn Martins?
Could be, or maybe Quinn Martin's more of a Marvel unit. No, because I'm sure there's no continuity other than maybe a Barnaby Jones canon crossover.
Yeah. Well, I also want to give props because we have the Dan August show came out on DVD.
Yeah,
and you got the DVD.
I did.
For me.
Oh, that's right, I did.
Yes.
And for me.
What a pal.
Yeah.
That was great. So, yeah, it's taken us a while. And, I kind of waited a little bit to dive in because I knew eventually, and I think we had some other shows booked. So the time was right. And then, but once we knew we were going to do it this season, we both tore it up.
Yeah. I've seen the whole thing.
You've seen the whole thing?
Including the pilot movie with a completely different cast.
Wow. Okay. I did not watch the pilot movie, and I've seen probably about more than half the episodes.
Yeah, the pilot movie, interesting. I already forgot the lead actor.
Christopher George.
Christopher George. Was he Ellery Queen?
That was...
He's just a guy that looks like...
I think that was Jim Hutton, I think, was Ellery Queen.
Yeah.
Well, Christopher George... But Christopher George wound up playing, I think, the same season of Dan August, the Immortal, the lead in that show. And he chose it. Quinn Martin wanted Christopher George to play the role in the series.
Okay.
And Christopher George had several... I don't know why I keep saying his full name like that, like it's
it's
Bob
a cool
Dole or
name.
something. Yeah. Christopher George.
Yeah. It would be confused if you just sang George.
Yes. Yeah. He chose the Immortal and been recommended to Quinn Martin, who wasn't real thrilled about it. He really wanted him for it. He said, "Hey, Burt Reynolds can do anything. Please, choose Burt."
Yeah.
Choose Burt. I don't know if he said it like
Burt.
that. Choose Burt.
Yeah.
But he said, take Burt Reynolds. And Burt Reynolds had been on a couple of Quinn Martin shows in smaller roles, but he decided to give him a shot and talk Burt Reynolds into doing it with reportedly
money?
a very hefty paycheck. And, you're right. The cast was entirely different. And that TV movie... Well, this is an interesting thing we can say about that. The TV movie is a little bit longer than usual. I guess they just did a little bit longer, but instead of cutting it down to fit in a time slot, Quinn Martin said, "No, we're not cutting it," and the network was like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah.
They just ran it like that.
Yeah, it does have Ned Romero plays the same character. Keenan Wynn plays the Norman Fell.
That's interesting.
Which now makes me want to imagine Keenan Wynn as Mr. Roper.
Oh.
I can see that in a way.
Yeah. I could see that too.
Yeah, and it's the story, I guess, is based on a novel, but then they made up their own characters.
Yeah. Well.
So Dan August is a Quinn Martin or whoever creation. Quinn Martin, I never see his name on the credits for Dan August for writing anything, but
No.
he seems more of a executive kind of producer.
Yes, I think you're right. I actually read...
Not an executive, but a producer who's an executive.
Yes.
Rather than that.
I read an excellent book called Quinn Martin Producer by Jonathan Etting, I believe it is. And it sort of starts out like it might be a biography, but really it kind of talks about Quinn Martin, the person, like in maybe the first chapter, and then it just goes show by show and talking about the show. And one theme that comes out of the book is you start wondering, like, well, how much did Quinn Martin really have to do with these programs?
Right. And
I think it was not really hands-on, except there were some general precepts, as it were, that applied to pretty much all the shows, which we can probably get into, because I think Dan August plays like a really essential Quinn Martin show. And I think even the episode we picked summarizes a lot of my feelings about the series in general, which we'll get into. But yeah, Quinn Martin had a reputation as being a great producer, but a lot of it was because he insisted on certain things. And, the quality of the series may have varied. We should mention some of the other shows he did, right? He did The Fugitive,
right.
The Invaders, Cannon, Barnaby Jones, The
Howard.
FBI, which the FBI, I think, was actually his most popular show. That was on like 9 seasons and had the highest ratings overall.
That started in the 60s?
Yeah, that was like a 65, 74-ish. And then Barnaby Jones, I think, was his second most popular show.
Okay. And The Fugitive is the most respected.
I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorites. And that's where a lot of it started. He had involvement with the Untouchables, but he wasn't really happy with the way I think Desilu didn't give him the freedom he wanted, so he took like a payoff and just left the show after the first season or something like that, and then started his own company, QM Productions, and then went on and did the shows and seemed to always have something cooking. Every now and then he would try like some movies and some different things, but yeah, had pretty much like a 20-year run and pretty good. We're missing a few like shows that didn't last as long, I think, but that's the bulk of it.
Streets of San Francisco.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that show.
Yeah, I've heard of that show.
I've heard of that show.
So pretty much all cop detective shows, right?
Yeah, that was what he was known for. I think he maybe got a little frustrated, according to the book, later in life, trying to break out of it. One of the big sources for the book was his widow, and she kind of talked about that a little bit. And he also he spent most of his career at ABC and then kind of moved to CBS, and there was a lawsuit like right before Dan August. I think Dan August may have come partly out of that lawsuit. Like ABC sued him, and then he countersued, and he won some settlement. And part of the settlement was he would be non-exclusive with ABC, but I think as part of that settlement, they agreed to put Dan August on and gave him the show. So there's like a gap, I think, FBI was still on, but there's a gap between like The Invaders and Dan August, and I think it was because there was some kind of legal trouble going on between Quinn Martin and ABC.
Okay. And The Invaders is, what is it? Is that a legal drama or a space drama?
It's about space lawyers. No, it's not, but wouldn't it be cool if it were?
Yeah.
There's one guy, everybody thinks he's paranoid, but he's sort of discovered that there's aliens among us.
Right.
and it's sort of like a reverse Fugitive or something like that.
Okay.
But yeah, Roy Thennison, and that was a quality show that was
Yeah, I
only on
wanna
a
see
couple
that one.
seasons. Yeah, well, it's a really cool show, and it looks, I think, it would look great in HD if they like put that on Blu-ray, but it hasn't made it yet. But so Dan August is on DVD. It doesn't look great,
No.
but it was also on Get TV a few years ago, I believe, maybe like after they put it on DVD or around. So other than that, I don't think it was on
Right.
TV for quite a while.
You know where it would be a good fit? That other channel, like the one that's all like action stuff.
Heroes and Icons,
No, it's like one word.
action.
Well, that would work too.
I don't know.
Wasn't there another one like?
No, you probably Charge.
Charge.
Charge, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the one that showed like chips and stuff.
Yeah.
You're right. Yes.
Yeah, the DVD's not the best of quality. The pilot movie looks great.
Yeah.
Everything else is a little wonky.
I think VEI, Visual Entertainment Incorporated, a Canadian company, put it out, and we're grateful to them because they put out a lot of stuff that nobody else would.
Yeah.
But they take what's given them, and they got these masters that for some reason are slightly time sped.
Yeah.
And they compressed it a little bit just to fit everything on the disc. So the picture's a little soft, and it's slightly time sped, which honestly I don't think I would have noticed. But if you watch, there's a great theme song for Dan August.
Yes.
If you watch, you can really tell if you watch the theme song that it's slightly sped up and stuff. And if you watch some of the clips, so Burt Reynolds, and I think in our episode, one of the actors in particular, what I was watching, I was like, yes. His voice sounds a little higher, although he's a little younger too. So we'll get into that. But yeah, I think they're unedited. They're just time sped a little bit. So I appreciate them being uncut.
Yes, I do that. And weirdly, they're at least those ones are distributed by Aaron Spelling's company.
Yeah, World Vision, not
World Vision.
affiliated with the religious.
World Vision,
World Vision
the
International.
spelling, and somehow Blockbuster is part of that too.
Yeah, that is one of my favorite disclaimers in television history. World Vision, not affiliated with World Vision International, religious and charitable organization. It's like, yeah, I just like seeing that for some reason.
Yeah.
So yeah, and after its one season on ABC, Burt Reynolds became like a movie star, like a big movie star.
Yeah.
And then CBS ran the show as a summer replacement series for like 2 different years, I think.
Did they do it in the 80s or something?
They put him in the 70s. It was like a regular part of their schedule.
Okay.
And they edited episodes into movies.
Right.
And I think the only footage, I think they shot a little bit of new footage with Richard Anderson to like bridge episodes, like probably in a really clumsy way. I've never seen them. But it was just to cash in to take advantage of Burt Reynolds being a movie star.
Yeah. And he also, I hope I'm correct on this, sort of after that or around that time, he boosted his popularity by becoming sort of a regular on the talk show circuit, right?
Right,
And
yeah.
being more, fun Bert than...
Yeah.
Because he's almost zero fun in
That's right.
this series.
It's one of those things like there's multiple reports that talk about that. I think in the book I read and stuff. And it's one of those things that I'd be skeptical of, except, when you watch the show, it's like, this is not the Burt Reynolds you would see later.
No.
And apparently, like, I would like to track this down, but supposedly this could be stories being conflated. But there's a story that he went on the Tonight Show and took like a blooper reel of bloopers from Dan August and like was joking about it, and everybody was like, "Oh man, this guy's great." And supposedly even Michael Eisner said that later and said, we saw like footage of or we saw Burt on talk shows. We're like, why was this guy not on there?
Right.
And I don't know if that's 100% true, but that's but
And then someone said that to Bert, and at the end of every movie,
yeah,
I'll just put him on there.
yes,
I don't have to lug him to the talk show.
that's right. He became the king of bloopers.
Yeah.
Bloopers. Interesting. Well, anyways, so this has got to be to me one of the more interesting one-season programs in our era.
Yeah.
I'm glad we're getting to it. It's really fascinating to watch. And like one thing about Quinn Martin shows is you're always going to get like really good guest stars in them.
Yeah. I guess maybe because it's 1970 and a lot of the guest stars are older, it wasn't. Not every episode is like a guest star palooza.
Yeah.
This episode is.
Yeah. The one we're going to talk about. Hold on to your hats, folks.
Right. But, some of them I'm like, oh, that must be somebody. I'm not too familiar with them. Or, it's and Richard Basehart.
Yeah.
Which is a name, but
Well,
and I was like, I really need to know more about him. So I looked him up and he's just sort of, I don't know, a character actor.
Yes.
There wasn't like one giant thing that was jumping out.
And by the way, no relation, Richard Basehart, no relation to me.
Yes.
But Yeah, he was on like Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, right?
Right.
And which, like, growing up, that was not syndicated, so I didn't see it until like years later. Any of that, and it's not like a show I have a real fondness for. But that's a good example because I was just telling you about that. You had something you had said, made me watch that episode, and I got through the patented Quinn Martin part where they say the cast and the guest stars, and I was like, well, Richard Basehart, that's cool, but there's nobody else that really thrills me. And then like right after that, John Ritter shows up.
Right.
Doesn't get pre-credits thing. Is it very young John Ritter? But I was like, oh yeah, and then I was kind of like excited about that. So it's like you never know.
Yeah, exactly. There's one with Joan Van Ark. I don't think she was in the main credits either in that episode.
No,
I doubt it. I mean, her role was pretty small, but
right.
Or Robert Pine. He's his role in the episode he's in is relatively small, and he's young, and so he's listed in the end credits. But it is always exciting to get to that part. Because you usually don't see a lot of those guest stars until you get to that credits, and I love that the structure of it, and that again, I'm not being super familiar with Quinn Martin shows. I didn't realize that's pretty much how all of them go. So there's the teaser, and then the credits, and the Dan August, a Quinn Martin production.
Yeah,
intoning all of the names of the stars and the guest stars, and then. And every act gets labeled.
Yes,
and then epilogue without the U and the E.
I love the methodical nature of how the names are too. Like Burt Reynolds. It's like just the right amount of enthusiasm, but it's kind of like methodical. Like it's not rushed. You get time like for each one to breathe. And in the book, in that Quinn Martin producer book, I hadn't really thought about this before. I thought, well, maybe it was just a stylistic thing that he liked. But if you think about it. Or maybe this is stunningly obvious to everyone but me, but part of that was it was like kind of a bone to these guest stars, like because that way they get visual credit before the show, right in the beginning. It's kind of an inducement to them, or as what his philosophy was.
Yeah,
and I guess it worked. So it was he did it because he thought that the viewers liked it, and also as a bone to like the stars. And the same thing with like the Act 1, Act 2. His philosophy was that it oriented viewers and helped them realize, where they were and stuff in case you were flipping or something like that. So really, he just thought it was like good service for the viewers. And I really enjoy it. I mean, I kind of like when you're watching a bunch of these, like I find myself when other shows that have ad breaks in them, I find myself saying Act 2, when they come back from the commercial. I kind of wish more shows had that.
Right, yeah. It is, it's a helpful placeholder.
Yeah.
Now, when I was rewatching this and taking notes, I looked down and then I'm like, wait, I didn't see the Act 3. And luckily, the VEI put them as chapters, so I was able to jump back. Oh, it just started. Okay. Well.
There's a lot going on, and
oh boy,
typical Dan August in this episode especially. And and one other thing is like that Ralph Sinensky. He's a longtime TV director that has an excellent blog with all kinds of like little details on pretty much everything he worked on. And I found his website to be one of the best sources of Dan August information because you don't see a lot about it, of like actually what it was like working in the show. Even the book I read, the chapter on Dan August, is understandably rather short. He talked several times, I think, in those entries about how one of the philosophies, especially with like these cop procedural shows, was to do something exciting before the credits to hook the viewer in.
Right.
So a lot of, and Dan August is no exception, a lot of times you will actually see like a murder committed or some kind of dynamic scene right at the beginning to hook you in.
Yeah.
And, then they'll go into the show. But, it was obvious deliberate strategy, and other shows did that at the time too, of course, but you definitely see that in Dan August. Yeah. They don't ease into things, really.
Right. It's not just Dan and Charlie having coffee.
Yeah.
I'd like more scenes of them having coffee. But, that's not going to grab the viewer.
No. Well, the average viewer would.
The average.
You and me, yes, it would grab us.
Yeah. And the theme song, which you mentioned, is very cool, jazzy, sort of that Lalo Schifrin kind of thing.
Yeah.
By Dave Grusin, who I believe is a baddie winner for St. Elsewhere.
Ah, you're right.
And he wrote the music for Good Times.
Yes, he did.
I don't remember if that won the baddie or I think it had the misfortune maybe of being
I think it was
in the Cheers here.
Yes. I think you're right. I'll have to look that up. But yeah, the guy had a prolific and amazing career in television and movies.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, right there, to be responsible for Good Times in this Dan August song is a good accomplishment.
Yeah.
He clearly didn't do the same thing over and over again. If you look at like his body of work.
No. I mean, St. Elsewhere, that's totally different.
Yeah. And there's such a cool opening sequence too.
Yes.
Which I guess we could get into.
Let's go ahead and get it.
But
since you mentioned it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very based around graphics of the Dan August logo, which itself is not that exciting. It's pretty thin sans serif font, but they kind of put various images in the like the holes of the letters, and they're all of Bert in action. My favorite, I think, is because it only happens once, is when he's sliding across the church floor.
Oh my gosh, that is so incredible.
And when I saw that episode, like, as soon as I saw him go in the church, I'm like,
yes,
oh,
this is
gonna happen.
Yeah.
and then a lot of the other ones are him doing the patented Dan August leap.
Oh yeah. Yes, I love that move, and he famously did most of his own stunts in this series.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Was really committed to it, loved to do it, and actually he took it seriously. He had the stunt person background.
Right.
I believe he was safe. I mean, he's not. What I'm trying to say is he was not just some jerk, just
right.
thinking he could jump. He didn't waste people's time. There were some few injuries here, but they weren't like his fault or anything. He was careful and respectful of the process, but he loved doing his own stunts. And I think that director, talked in specific, gave some examples of how it actually helped them, the production. When you have like the star, it gives you freedom to do certain kind of shots and stuff like that, because he's going to be doing it. And you can do more close-ups, things like that. But yeah, that shot of him going down the aisle in the church towards the camera with like an expression of rage on his face,
right?
And the whole sequence makes the show look probably 10 times more dynamic than it actually is.
Yes.
You agree with me on that?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah. There's usually one or two scenes like that.
Yeah.
And this episode, we did not get a patented Dan August car chase, but many of them have car chases, not usually involving him, but they pretty much run the same way. Mm-hmm. Police are chasing a suspect or a potential suspect or a potential witness, and that person eventually runs off the road.
Yes. Yeah, you're right.
And the credits, my other favorite thing is Richard Anderson's expression. For some reason, the clip they showed, he's like turning his head and he's got his lips pursed, and he looks like, I don't know, like reptilian somehow.
Reptilian. Yes.
It's very interesting.
That's good. Yes, and he's basically playing Lieutenant Dan August's boss.
Yeah, he's the chief.
Yeah.
And he's caught between believing in Dan and politics.
Yeah.
Almost always.
Yeah, the boys upstairs.
Yeah.
Well, I guess they're not upstairs.
The mayor.
Yeah. The suits.
The DA.
Yeah.
City council.
Yeah.
Whoever it is, there's all rich people. There's always somebody he's got to answer.
Yeah, and he's always kind of like he's very often brooding over these dynamics, these relationships.
Yeah.
He's got to deal with Dan. That part of it is a little standard. The two of them work good to work well together. Mm-hmm. The one thing you'll find out about Dan August is there's no exploration of the characters' personal lives. Barely Dan August.
Right. I think one episode, maybe it's like the first episode, hints at a past romance, right, with Diana Muldaur.
Yeah.
And one episode, the Robert Pine episode, has a tiny bit of potential romance.
Yeah.
He does kiss the woman.
Okay, I've not seen that one yet.
Okay, yeah, but it's a weird.
That's no spoiler because I would assume any possible love interest he's going to kiss her eventually.
Right? Yeah, yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
There's one episode that kind of focuses on Charlie, like because many episodes the one thing you know about Dan, or the few things you know, he's from the city, Santa Louisa. He grew up there. He played football in high school and college, much like Bert. Mm-hmm. I think got injured maybe in college, much like Bert.
Much like Bert, yeah.
And he seems to know everyone.
Yeah.
He's almost always knows someone involved in the case.
Yeah, that's clearly that's one of the hooks of the show.
Yeah.
Is that he's it's supposed to be like a small town, and so he winds up having personal involvements with everybody.
Right.
What would it be like to have to solve all these crimes?
Yeah.
So it's like, that's the extent of it, though. They don't really, it's kind of superficial. Like his connection to the town.
Right.
It comes up as it's needed, but you don't have other than that, he if not for these cases and his reaction to them, he doesn't really seem tethered to the community that much.
No.
Except when he's like saying, "Oh yeah, I knew him. Oh yeah, you knew him, didn't you, Dan? Yeah, I went to high school with him,
Right, yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's the Heap, his football buddy.
Yeah.
And everything else is like, yeah, I knew him, or went to high school with him, or raced cars with him, or this or that.
Yeah. I mean, he seems to have had a rich, full life.
Yeah.
Outside, his police work, but you don't get a lot of hints. You get hints of it, but you don't get evidence of it.
Yeah. And one episode gives some insight to Ned Romero's character, Joe, the agriculture union episode with Ricardo Montalban.
So.
And that's really it.
Yeah. Joe is the guy that does a lot of the legwork.
Yeah. I love is that the first episode? There's one episode where Dan keeps telling him to make a list. make all these lists.
Yeah.
And it pans out, but he's just like, let me guess, make a list.
Yeah. It's a recurring thing. Yeah.
And he does. It is a lot of like, okay, I need you to go do this.
Yeah.
I'm going to go drive around and rouse people. But you go do this.
Yeah. And you have.
And then he walks over and gets a cup of coffee.
Yes.
Or something.
Yeah. And Norman Fell's Charlie
Yeah.
is pretty much like his right-hand man and goes around with him and does all of it.
One thing I noticed when I was rewatching this episode, I feel like there's nobody says it, but everyone knows that Dan is like this. He's got some sort of, I don't know, not genius maybe, but instinct for things. And that instinct can lead to the truth, but it can get him into trouble. And there's a lot of like people like Charlie and Joe and Untermeyer kind of just keeping an eye, like literally keeping an eye on him. Like, should you be doing this? Or like nudging him. Like, this might not be the best idea.
I think that's very perceptive. That's a good point. It's something that they don't really develop all the way, but I think that's something that maybe they would have gone more. It's like there's almost like you're right. There's almost like an underlying tension between like instinctual and like procedural and like doing things by the book. Yeah. Which like everybody else sort of represents that view in most cases. Right. And more instinctive. That's a good way of putting it, I think. I mean, I got a feeling on this one.
Yeah. And he's Charlie's superior, but Charlie is clearly the old hand.
Yeah.
He just hasn't risen above sergeant. It's like a military thing. He's
right.
He's the the major domo or the that's not military, but you know what I mean, like the British thing where it's like the sergeant who's the right hand man of the officer.
Yeah.
And it's been there forever.
Yeah, he's probably happy not to do some of the stuff that Dan. He's probably happy to give counsel, even if it means not being listened to all the time, because he doesn't have to make those decisions. Yeah. But yeah, and the other regular is Ina Hartman.
Yes. She's
kind of like more like the secretary.
Yeah.
But it's she's happens to be a black regular on the show.
Right.
Which is sort of refreshing. Nobody makes. It's not really a thing. She's just a regular. No, she doesn't. She barely has anything to do.
Exactly. I think there's one episode where she gets to be a little involved in the case. Yeah. To help trap a prevert.
I mean, this is one of the things about the show is they've got these named like 5 main characters. Yeah. And it's almost like I don't know. It's almost like there's so many. They're just there though. They you don't get a lot of like interaction except between Bert. Ned Romero and Ina Hartman are sort of there, which is fine. Yeah. But I sort of wonder. But then again too, it's not like a PI show. No. I mean, it's kind of cool that Dan August is part of this group. Yeah. Which seems to be a little elastic, the size of the police department, depending on the story needs.
Much like the city.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yes, Santa Louisa. One episode, the title is like "Death of a Small Town." Mm-hmm. I think one episode they talk about the population being 35,000, which seems bigger than a small town to me. But it has whatever the story needs. They have it. Yeah. They've got an airport.
Yeah. Right.
They've got the beach, a harbor. They have agriculture.
Pretty good sized sports arena.
Good, yeah.
A scene which I think was in the town.
Racetrack.
Yeah.
Auto race and a horse racing track. They have both.
Yeah. Pretty good sized hospital.
Yes. A university.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Various hippies and Black Power people and all the stuff that was going on.
Yeah,
there.
Very diverse population.
Yeah. Unions.
Yeah.
But boxing. You said that right?
Yeah.
The boxing arena. Really?
It's quite a place.
It is. The bus station. That's not as big of a surprise, but it's situated somewhere between Los Angeles and San Francisco.
Yeah, supposedly it was based on Santa Barbara.
Yeah, that would have been my guess. Just that's what the Ross McDonald books have a town based in Santa Barbara too. It's similarly somewhere on the coast, but even that's a little elastic. Mm-hmm. Like sometimes it seems like they're further north, and sometimes it seems like they're in Southern California. Yeah,
I mean, it's interesting. Cool. You might as well, if you're going to do that, why not have like a fictional place? Yeah.
Because then you can have anything you want.
Right.
Obviously shot in L.A., and even though, there are sets, a lot of location shooting.
Yeah.
I like that.
Another hallmark of the Quinn Martin shows.
Yeah.
He was very committed to doing location shooting, which made his series usually more expensive to produce. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times it was coming out of like his pocket, but maybe not his personal pocket, but he was committed to that. And another thing that keeps coming up is they did not do like day for night shooting. So they would shoot like a lot of night footage at night, which, as you know, is very much more expensive. Yeah. But he just thought like people would, people could tell, and he
Right.
thought it was inauthentic. So he liked the location shooting and night for night, day for day, and that really makes a lot of his programs look polished. I mean, one thing you can say about this program is it looks good, and there's production values behind it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting because I remember hearing some actor talking about going from Quinn Martin to a different show and saying that the sets were cheap on Quinn Martin shows. I didn't notice. I mean, the police station set looks great.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they reused some things, and maybe every now and then they hastily did. Like I think on that blog that Ralph Sinensky was talking about, I think it was like weather prevented them from doing something, so they had to construct a set. Maybe they had to do it quickly. I don't know.
Yeah.
But overall, I mean, just the fact that hey, I'll take some sets every now and then if you're going to feature a lot of location shooting, even if the sets aren't always 100%, especially if it's like an interrogation room or something like that. It can just be functional as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, that is interesting.
But it's a cool show. We're going to get into it.
It's very cool. It's very cool. Yes, I have some questions that I think maybe will come up.
Okay.
Some themes that I think will come up as we go through it.
Okay. And to me, there were like there's like a handful of you can label shows certain. There's like social relevance show episodes. You mentioned like unions and Black Power and hippies and and it's cool that they have that stuff. I think it's a little bit of just like everything else, a little glossed over sometimes. Or, the crime, and like the Black Power one ends up having nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
Other than sort of people pointing the finger that direction.
It's like they dip their toe in something but don't really commit to it. And I'm going to hold my thought on that because some of the scenes later kind of address my feelings on that too. But I agree with you.
But, but they don't shy away from that stuff existing.
Right.
Homosexuality's brought up, or not brought up, it's a major plot point.
Right. In like 1970, it's surprisingly subdued, I guess.
Yeah.
Be the word. I mean, it's there, but it's not like...
It acknowledges that it exists.
Right.
And there's a weird one. I don't know if you saw that one. There's one that has one of the suspects had been convicted for pedophilia before. And Untermeyer kind of has the epilogue at the end is a scene where he's kind of sympathetic to the guy's life now.
Right.
I'm like, that's pretty bold.
Yeah, it's like treating it more like a mental illness than like a crime.
Right. Yeah.
Kind of leaning towards the mental illness part of it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like a Jack Webb's Dragnet of the '60s and how it deals with these things. I don't always agree with the approach of it.
Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting approach. It's not looking to make the show about that, but there's clearly an emphasis. And actually, I believe in the book I read that the hands-on like producer I think was Anthony Spinner. And I think some of it drove him crazy. He didn't like some of that. He thought, well, this is getting too into the realm of messages and stuff like this when they did that. But he didn't like protest it or anything. But he wasn't really. I think he would have. I got the impression he would have preferred more like procedurals and just straight up murders without some of the social elements.
And then the other kind of main one are like rich people murders.
Yeah.
A lot of those. And some other stuff in between, but familial spats and this and that. But
yeah, it's almost always murder, right? I mean,
I think it always is.
Yeah.
I think he's the murder detective. He's the homicide department. They are. Because like you said, the size of the police is a little elastic, but they definitely have a robbery division that comes up once or twice, and the homicide people look down on the robbery people.
Yeah.
And they definitely have a uniform presence.
Yeah, they got
I think they have a vice squad.
They got a lab.
They do have a lab.
They got the boys in the lab. I always like hearing about the boys in the lab.
Right. Yeah.
Send that to the boys in the lab. They'll have them take a look at it.
So they have what they need.
And they got a regular coroner who shows up, quite often.
Whose name I don't know.
I don't remember his name.
Doc.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bones.
Quincy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember the actor's name is Barney Phillips. He's very distinctive looking.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't remember the character's name now.
Okay.
Why don't we just get into the episode? This is an episode that you gave me sort of a heads up on.
Yeah.
But you did not spoil who the guest stars were.
No.
So folks, we've talked a lot about Dan August.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you the name of the episode, and if you want to go watch it, and if you want that joy of discovering these guest stars on your own, the episode is called "The Manufactured Man." It's episode 22 of season 1. I think it's on the 4th disc of the set. If
Yes,
you have the
it is.
DVDs. Okay, there you go. That's your last warning.
And just in case you're interested in seeing the Robert Pine episode, it's the one before this.
Okay, so Lori and I watched this episode not knowing who was going to, and we were delighted. Like right from the get-go when they announced it, And Lori was laughing because they're rattling off the names. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is a good one. So, and then we kind of talk like, well, we kind of got to go with this one.
Yeah.
This is so entertaining. So, it premiered March 11th, 1971. Two little tidbits of TV things that also happened on this date. Philo Farnsworth died.
Oh, no.
One of the creators of television.
Yeah.
The Lawrence Welk Show was canceled by ABC.
Oh.
Yeah, sad day
Yeah.
for Lawrence Welk fans.
That's why Philo Farnsworth died.
Yeah, yeah.
He was like,
Distraught.
like when I helped invent TV, along with a number of other people in parallel,
Yeah.
this was what I imagined.
Yes. And he probably saw that the whole future of the medium is a very bleak one without Lawrence Welk. Little did he know that Lawrence Welk would go on to, find a second life on public broadcasting stations. Poor Philo.
So at the time, Lawrence Welk was on CBS or a network?
Yeah, he was ABC canceled.
ABC, okay.
So he was on ABC, and then I think that's when he moved to PBS, like right after this. But he was like a network presence in the.
Yes, and then it's still on.
Yeah,
Not new episodes.
I think it is. Yeah,
some places it's still on.
Have to put that on the big list. The Lawrence Welk Show. So on NBC this night, this is when primetime started at 7:30. So you had the Flip Wilson Show at 7:30, Ironside at 8:30, Adam 12 at 9:30, and then at 10 o'clock, the Dean Martin Show with special guests Orson Welles and Petula Clark. Interesting lineup, eh? CBS had Family Affair at 7:30. I think then in its final season, the Jim Neighbors Hour at 8 o'clock with special guest star Johnny Cash. And then at 9 o'clock, a movie called Travis Logan, D.A., which is actually a pilot with Vic Morrow and Hal Holbrook. I think Vic Morrow would have been the lead, Travis Logan. You know what's interesting about this TV movie?
I mean, the Mark Twain's in it?
Now, well, that is interesting, of course. I will tell you, it was a Quinn Martin production.
Ah.
So, yes, Quinn Martin was competing with himself this night. Yes.
And, of course, Hal Holbrook, years later, would be part of Evening Shade with Burt.
That's right, yes. So it was a pilot that didn't make it to series. So ABC, Alias Smith and Jones, a Western show at 7:30, followed by Bewitched. Isn't that interesting that 1970 Bewitched is still, or 1971, Bewitched is still in the air. 9 o'clock, Make Room for Granddaddy, a sort of spin-off of the long-running Danny Thomas sitcom. Dan August at 9:30, another example of these weird thing of hour-long shows starting at 9:30. It just didn't sit right with me now.
No.
I can't. And then 10:30, at least in the New York market, when I looked up, it was This Is Your Life with Betty Davis, although it seems like it was preempted for what reason, I don't know. But it looks like ABC wasn't really programming at 10:30. Most along the network, it was local programming then, which doesn't speak really well of ABC. So
it was preempted by This Is Your Life with Joan Crawford.
Oh boy. What a kerfuffle that caused. So the program, it aired September 1970 to April 1971. Dan August did. And then it was revived in the summer of mid-70s on CBS. But it started out Wednesdays at 10 p.m. and then moved to Thursdays at 9:30 like it was here. So one season, 26 episodes. And so here we go. This is 9:30, March 11th, 1971. The Manufactured Man.
Yes. And it opens on a bus at night.
Yeah.
Deep at night, if we learn, actually, at 5 a.m.
Have we lost some of the romance of the Greyhound bus? I mean, a lot of like these old shows of this era would have like somebody getting off a bus.
Yeah.
And you don't get that as much now.
I mean, it's a grimy romance, but
Yes.
at its best.
Yeah.
But yeah, you don't get that anymore.
Yeah.
People arriving at a lonely bus depot.
Yeah. And bus depots that are open like at weird hours.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's a young blonde woman and a shady guy with a beard. A drifter.
Yeah.
A familiar drifter.
Yes, there is something familiar about him.
Yes. And she goes into the bus station. The only person in the bus station is a janitor. And then the drifter comes in. She goes to the phone booth to make a call, and whoever she's looking for is not there. And the drifter is like peering at her, leering at her through the window or the glass on the phone booth, and trying to get her attention. Before she got the call, by the way, she bought a cold drink from a cold drink machine.
There's something else we don't see much anymore.
Love a cold drink machine.
Yes.
Yeah.
You get the cup.
Yep.
You get the ice.
Yeah.
Then you get the drink.
The first year I was in graduate school, in one of the buildings, a building that was open all the time, and I was living on campus, and they had a machine like that. And it wasn't like it was like a nice sized cup.
Oh, nice.
And it had Fanta in it when Fanta was had stopped being around as much.
Uh-huh.
That was a cool place to go, like at 2 hours.
Yeah. Get your cold drink.
That's right. We were going to the clubs downtown, or let's just go get a cold drink from the. and sit there. They had tables that you could sit there. It was like almost like a lounge.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
Relax, enjoy a cold drink.
Yeah,
I like it.
it was good. Ice was good. It's a thing. Like whenever you see those coffee machines in shows, they don't work.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, but she gets a cold drink, and when she finishes the phone call and goes out, and the drifter is following her, she throws the drink in his face.
The cold drink machine pays off.
Yes.
Beautifully constructed screen teleplay.
Right. And then and she heads out in the morning and stops at a car thinking that's her ride, and it turns out it's someone else, and she keeps going, and the drifter is following her, and she gets scared, so she goes into an alley, and he's standing at the end of the alley, and then we cut back to her, and she gets attacked by a man.
Yeah.
A man in the shadows.
Yeah, it's very shadowy, hard to see a lot of details. But yeah, this is pretty well shot, and it's disturbing.
Yeah. And so the drifter, and the first time I watched this, I didn't really recognize him until that last scene.
Mm-hmm.
This time I'm like, why didn't I recognize him?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a young Harrison Ford.
Mm-hmm.
Very exciting already.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, and I knew he had done a little TV then, but and I didn't think much of the work he did. I seem to remember hearing him talk about it, but still, it's always exciting to see someone of that stature.
Yeah, the beard and the general shagginess disguises him a bit.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's definitely him.
Yeah, and playing a creep. I mean, he doesn't always play nice guys, but you don't really see him being a creep.
No, this is it's against type for sure.
Yeah,
here and actually it's a little bit later, but here's like hearing his voice in this, especially one of like the later scenes where he's being like sort of interrogated. That's where it seemed like, again, it's young Harrison Ford, but it's like, man, his voice is usually is usually a little bit lower, I think, even then.
Yeah,
that's one scene where it stood out to me a little bit.
In like American Graffiti and the first Star Wars, it's a little higher, but I think by the time of Raiders and Empire,
Harrison Ford became a man.
Yes. Yeah. And then, of course, later it became growly.
Yeah.
Get off my plane.
Yes, I may be influenced by his current growly era.
Yeah.
Now he's like more subdued growly.
Yes.
He went through like peak growly, and then he just became like kind of low key growly.
Right. And then we get those opening credits that we mentioned. And do you want to list the three guest stars that we get?
Well, let me see if I can remember them in the order. So I have to go through. I'm going through the whole sequence. Dan August.
Right.
A Quinn Martin production, starring Burt Reynolds. Okay, well,
also starring Corbin Fell.
Yes, we get Mickey Rooney.
Yes.
Right away.
Right.
I'm super thrilled to see Mickey Rooney.
I know.
That's just incredible.
Yeah.
I did not expect that, and it's like an interesting looking Mickey Rooney.
Yes,
too.
he's still got red hair.
Yeah, it's like that the middle aged Mickey Rooney.
Yeah.
You don't see a lot of the middle aged Mickey Rooney.
Right, and within a few years, he'll be old Mickey Rooney.
Yeah, that's right. And then once he gets to that stage, he's always old Mickey Rooney.
Yeah.
But here he's still middle-aged Mickey Rooney. Okay, then the next one, I believe, was David Soul.
Yep.
Yeah, David Soul. And wow, what a performance David Soul gives in this, right? So that was exciting, too.
Uh-huh.
And then Billy D. Williams.
Yeah. Holy mackerel.
That totally threw me.
Han Solo and Lando Calrissian in the same episode.
Oh, man. This is brilliant.
Yeah.
So I was won over right by the opening credits.
Right. Me too. And then there are a few others.
Yes, there's more to come. We're really spoiled in this episode, aren't we?
Yes. And so then we begin Act 1. And now it's daytime, and Dan and Charlie are arriving at the scene. Their uniformed cops are already there, and Joe's already there. And Billy D is kind of standing nearby and looks distraught. Somebody makes reference to him being the press, and that they're already there. And the young woman is lying dead under a campaign poster for Lawrence Merrill II, who's running for governor on a Law and Order ticket.
Mm-hmm.
And so, they find a bus ticket that she was from Billings, Montana. And, Dan makes some remark about it. She came all the way to Santa Louisa for this or something like that.
Yeah, welcome to Santa Louisa.
Yeah. And Charlie's like, I like this. Charlie was really a more realistic idea. Like, happens all the time everywhere.
Yeah, and he says like Santa Louisa is no different than any other place.
Yeah.
I thought it was kind of an odd exchange, but yeah.
Yeah. But I like that because, it's a kind of exchange that probably, or the kind of attitudes, both of them, that happen in real life. That there's a tendency if you live our town's turning terrible now.
Yeah,
This only happens in Los Angeles or whatever. And he's like, nah, it can happen anywhere.
That's a good point too, and it gets to like the sort of world weariness of the Norman Fell character, at least the
Yes.
more laid back nature, as opposed to the more intense Burt Reynolds character.
Yeah, right. His cynicism is turned into a shrug.
Yeah.
And Billy D's character, McAdams, again is upset and I think a little sick.
Mm-hmm.
And Dan is not sympathetic to him at all. And Charlie seems a little better, but then he's sure got here fast.
Yeah.
Then the bus station, the janitor tells him about the drifter, and then he's the one who uses the word drifter. But I love that's the word. He looks like a drifter to me.
Just assume he was.
Yes, because he has he's shaggy and he has a guitar.
Yeah,
and
the guitar is what.
Yes, and
really nails it.
One of those leather jackets with the fringe.
Yeah.
So he left stuff in a locker and is still there. So Charlie stays there and Dan goes out to his car. He calls in, the drifter's description, and then McAdams asks him for a lift. And as they're driving back to town, he explains that he knew the girl and that she left town last year. She was his friend, and she had been Merrill's secretary and dated Merrill's son, Lawrence III, a.k.a. Tersh.
Yeah, Tersh.
I'm glad I don't know, and yet I want to know.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
I speculated right away if it meant tertiary,
Yeah.
being the third.
Oh,
Short
okay.
for that.
Yeah.
But I was joking when I said that. I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah, it could be.
That'd be
I'll take it.
sort of crude and sophisticated at the same time.
Yeah. Lawrence II was called Deuce, so.
And McAdams is already he's already a little testy.
Yes. Yeah, he's definitely bitter about something.
Mm-hmm.
And he ends up just like getting out. I mean, they stop to talk and he just climbs out of the car. Or is that later?
Well,
Is that another scene?
it's hard because they have several testy exchanges, but he says, "Don't put your weight on me."
Yeah. Yeah, and then he gets it.
But then I think
because he says...
I think they get done. I think
Yeah,
because they
yeah.
end on like a nice,
That's right.
sort of a little note of
That's right. He's
understanding.
like, I can't solve the whole crime for you.
Yeah, because he says like, we're going to be looking for answers, and he's like, hey,
Yeah.
you might have some of those answers.
Yeah,
Like, I can't do all your work for you.
that's right.
And let me say something about Billy D. Williams in this. He seems a little raw to me in this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not nearly the super suave Billy D. Williams that you would see probably even a few years later.
Yeah.
To me, he's a little. It wasn't the best Billy D. Williams performance, I think.
Yeah.
But he's supposed to be playing like. I think they've got like him with a lot of like. He's got like a chip on his shoulder, like a lot of things. It's just not quite. It's not quite what Billy D. Williams would become.
Right.
I think he's straining a little bit in this performance, but I still enjoy it, mind you.
Right. That was before he learned. Just relax, man.
Yeah.
Young Bert, young Billy D, they got to learn.
Yeah, well,
maybe the mixer gave him some tips.
That's possible. I would hope so.
Just be yourself. Just, and speaking of the mixer, Dan goes to Merrill's campaign office, and there we meet two characters. One is a large guy with a mustache named Fred. The guy's named Fred, not the mustache.
Thank you.
Fred Barstow, is it?
Bowers?
Bowers.
Yeah.
Yes. And the mixture is Merrill's campaign manager, Kenny O'Malley. We don't get the O'Malley for a while, but I still love it. Just that whole name. That sounds like,
Yeah.
Irish campaign manager.
I like it. Yeah.
Just a little spark plug.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And, Dan wants to know about the Tersh. They exchange some concerned glances, and he tells him what happened. The girl's name is Joanne. And, they seem concerned when they find out about that. And Kenny says she came back to help with the campaign, but he also kind of indicates that McAdams has it out for Merrill, has a beef with him, and that he had a yen for Joanne.
Yeah. He says that with some weight,
Yes.
too, at the end of that scene, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Bert kind of no-sells it.
Right. And they make it clear that he is a drunk.
Mm-hmm.
Tersh, that is. And Then we meet Tersh. He's in a hotel room, pretty drunk, and that's David Saul. And his dad, Lawrence Merrill, played by Keith Andes, and Fred is played by Peter Brown. After his time working for the Beatles.
Yes.
And anyway, Merrill comes to tell him the news, and Tersh is already being intense with his dad, and then he just kind of not quite freaks out, but he kicks him out. He's like, and they want him to go talk to the cops, and he's in a motel too. He's just crashing in a motel to get his drunk on.
Yeah, and Tersh winds up kind of erupting in this. And
yeah.
I use the word raw for Billy D. Williams, but David Soul takes raw to a whole new level.
Yes, he does.
And one thing I want to say about this, too, is this is an example, I think, of what the show does a lot. It's kind of like trying to demonstrate the generation gap, as they called it back then, but winds up illustrating it. Because they wind up with a lot of scenes I've noticed in this series where with young people talking to older people, they get like super condescending, and it winds up kind of going around the other way. It's like, well, I wouldn't want to hurt your precious campaign, man, or something like that, And so all the young people talk with this like this cool, affected way, which today winds up seeming a little phony to me.
Right.
And I think this scene illustrated that the way that Tersh deals with his father.
And I'm pretty sure this is one of the rare episodes where no one calls the cops pig.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Man. And back at the bus station, a young woman shows up to get the stuff out of the locker. And Charlie, who's been behind the ticket counter, I don't really know why.
Yeah, didn't need to be behind that.
No, because Dan's just standing around with
Yeah.
Why don't he just sit down with a newspaper or something?
Charlie's always been fascinated by the inner workings of bus depots.
Right.
This is his chance.
Yeah. Or maybe Norman Fowle was like, oh, there's a thing I got to crouch under to get out of the counter. Yeah. Bert's not the only one who does stunts. Look at this.
Yeah. Oh, he pulls it off flawlessly, too.
He still bend down and stand up.
Yeah.
And, they follow her on foot. And the drifter is at her place, and he sees them coming and sneaks out the back. Or I guess, she gets there, and because he has his stuff. And then, Dan's coming around the back, and he smashes Dan with his guitar.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
That was pretty cool.
And then, it's funny, too, because he's like, sort of like trying to apologize, like almost right after that.
Yeah.
Hey, man.
I didn't know you were police.
Yeah.
But Dan slams him against a wall, and pretty cool to see Burt Reynolds and Harrison Ford having a little fight.
It really is, yeah.
Yeah. And that was the end of Act 1.
Wasn't Burt Reynolds one of those speculated to be like somebody who was up for Han Solo? Or that somebody wanted him for Han Solo?
I really can't imagine that.
I can't imagine George Lucas
no
signing off on that.
I mean, I can imagine it, of course, because Norm Macdonald did his impression of him delivering, auditioning for it.
That's right.
But otherwise, it just seems weird.
Yeah, well,
Burt was a star by then, right? Act 2. Get Chief Untermeyer and Dan interrogating the drifter, whose name is Hewitt. And he's like, I was with the other chick all night. Man.
Yeah.
Dan says that, that they know who the other chick was, and that she has been busted for prostitution 8 times and shoplifting a couple times. I like the shoplifting.
Yeah. And there's kind of a funny reaction, like Harrison Ford puts his hand up against his mouth, like, brother, as this is going on. He actually has some kind of interesting expressions.
He does, and he does things that you're like, I guess they're just Harrison Ford things, because like that putting his hand across his mouth like that is a thing he does in movies all the time.
Yeah, that's a good point, yeah.
Like, oh, it's just him. It's not like, it seems like if you were listing the crimes, you might list the shoplifting first.
Yeah.
And 8 times for prostitution. Like, that's the button. But 8 and a couple times for shoplifting.
Yeah, right.
Basically saying she's not a reliable source.
Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, Charlie's, they've found Tersh. I don't know where Tersh is, where they found him.
Yeah.
But he's taking a shower.
Yeah, one thing I want to mention real briefly, too, is like that scene ended with, the previous scene ended with like a classic Burt smile.
Uh-huh.
Sort of like in response to George or Untermeyer saying something.
Yeah.
And it struck me because you don't get a lot of that in the show.
No.
That I've seen. And actually, because I was thinking, we're 22 episodes in, and it's like, this is more the Burt you would expect
Yeah.
to see it in this kind of show, like built around Burt Reynolds.
Right.
And you don't really get a lot of glimpses of that. And this is like one of my themes for Dan August.
Yeah.
Is Burt underplays so much. I mean, there's other things where he does like the sort of like underplaying so much he's overplaying, or like drawing attention to his underplaying. But in this one, he's actually like really underplaying through a lot of these episodes. And it's really in contrast. Like the character is supposed to have intensity, and he does sometimes. And in this episode, he does.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, like he's really subdued. So when you see Burt, that classic Burt smile, it really stands out in this one.
Yeah.
So I had to make mention of that.
Yeah. So, but they go to talk to Tersh. He's taking a shower at, I don't know,
Like
a
an
club, athletic club.
The
Yes.
Y?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's just, he says that they were going to get married before she left, and he doesn't know why she left, and then he doesn't remember anything from last night because he had blackouts.
Yeah, and he's pretty intense about it.
Yeah,
and he's a little edgy when he's asked about what he did and stuff, and he's prone to some verbal outbursts.
And he does. I mean, he doesn't like that he has blackouts. He seems at least tortured by his affliction. But
that's very true.
And he has a big scratch on his chest, which he says he got playing handball.
Yeah, that's quite a handball injury.
Yes, I assume we're going to talk about handball in another episode.
Yeah.
I think this is the handball I imagined. Not that handball.
Against an actual wall.
Yes.
And apparently, probably shirtless handball, I would think, too.
Right, yeah.
But I guess if you get hit hard enough, it could leave a mark. But
yeah, it
didn't look like a handball injury to me, is all I'm saying.
Right.
So I'm skeptical as Charlie is.
And his blood type is O, just in case. Which leads right to the coroner. Unfortunately, the suspect didn't leave any blood behind. And
it's very inconsiderate of him.
Did not commit any sexual crimes.
Mm-hmm.
Although they kind of made it look like it.
Right.
But he said she had a baby 4 or 5 months ago. We learned that from the autopsy. So that...
Very interesting piece of information.
Yes, it is.
And a lot of these things, like throughout the series too, like it's subtle, like the interplay between Bert and Norman. I have a very hard time calling anybody in this episode by their character names.
I know.
But just a glance, and they do a lot with it. And Norman Fellows, we know, but they'll look to each other. A lot of times when some piece of information comes up, they give each other a knowing look, and that's how they play it.
And they're having a driving scene and talking about the possible paternity, and that if Tersh is the dad, that gives him another reason to be a suspect, maybe. And this is where Charlie's kind of like, be careful, this guy might be governor.
Yeah.
Or if you're Kenny O'Malley, he already is governor, as far as you're concerned.
Yeah.
And then we go to the airport, where Merrill's giving a little speech before he heads out on a 7-day swing through the state on his private plane. And there are a couple hippies there protesting for legalizing pot.
Yeah. I think the sign actually says legalize pot.
Yes, it does.
No rhyme or anything.
No.
It's just right to the point.
But well painted.
Yes, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Very professionally painted.
It's very well, yeah.
And these hippies are played by Anthony Geary.
Did not recognize him at all.
Yeah, and even when you said his name to me in an email, I'm like, who?
Yeah.
I had to look him up. Like,
well,
so Luke from General
Him,
Hospital.
You know him as Tony.
Yes,
Geary.
Tony Geary. and Gary Busey.
Now him I recognize.
Yes. And and Merrill's like, this is why I'm a law and order campaign and everything, and then they start chucking cabbage at him.
Yeah, I think was there a few eggs first?
Yeah, I think so.
But then you get a great shot.
Like of a whole head of cabbage.
Yeah. Thrown right at the camera, basically. Yeah. This should have been the 3D episode of Dan August.
Yes.
Yeah, cabbage.
Yeah.
It was great too, because there's no like context for that,
No.
Like they don't set it up by showing they're like you said, they're at the airport.
Yeah.
They just brought this there
Right.
for the purpose of throwing it at the candidate.
Yeah. I can imagine those two guys. Kind of like those crooks in the Littlest Hobo finding the masks.
Yeah.
Just them at the grocery
Yep.
Oh, yeah. This'll do it.
Yeah. Like that scene in Pulp Fiction where Bruce Willis is finding the right weapon to use, and they pass up a banana, put it down, shake their head, get an orange, nah. Then they get the cabbage, yeah. And the patter from these hippies is not like sophisticated heckling either.
No,
it's just like, why don't you legalize pot?
And Fred chases them off, and then Dan and Charlie arrive, and McAdams is there, kind of. He immediately thinks it's a false flag operation.
Yeah.
Which could be.
He got a point there.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Kenny and Fred were talking to the hippies. Okay, You throw the cabbage. Do not hit the candidate with the cabbage. A leaf is okay, but if you just got to miss. These guys were actually like star baseball players.
Yeah.
Like, your strike zone is over there.
Yes.
The plane, that's fine.
I actually thought that maybe Billy D. Williams' character was correct.
Yes.
That was to kind of explain the amateurish nature of everything.
Yeah.
They should have the boys in the lab take a look at the cabbage. Maybe they did off camera and we just don't know about it.
Yeah, this cabbage definitely came from a home garden.
Yeah.
Does Lawrence Merrill have a cabbage garden?
Was growing cabbage legal in California at the time? I think maybe it was.
Yeah, I think so.
California it was.
Yeah. Kenny comes over. Kenny has a habit of coming over and interrupting discussions like that.
He does, and if I may, I believe there was great eye acting by Mickey Rooney in this. Like
Yes.
they show him like surveying the situation, like squinting and doing like narrowing his eyes, not quite full squint, but just looking at everything, and it is excellent eye acting by the mixer.
Yes.
But yes, you're right. He does. He comes up and
Yeah. Just
yeah,
they might be talking about something that
he
the governor
insinuates
won't
himself.
like.
Yeah.
The beginning of the scene when they're getting out of the limo, and he like leaps out of the limo, and I swear, he's going from a raised seated position to standing. I swear his height didn't change at all.
I'll have to give this another watch.
It's fascinating.
I hadn't noticed that.
Yeah.
That's good catch.
But and his whole performance is very. I mean, it's of course it's Mickey Rooney, so it's very energetic.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a little squirrely the whole time.
Yes.
A lot of hemming and hawing, and I'm sure giving it that mixture touch.
Yeah.
But Dan's like, we want to question him now because we got to find out about this father thing, and if he's leaving for a whole week, we need to know. And so they go on the plane, and Merrill is not happy about all this, and he's like, could be political consequences for our campaign and for you. So he's kind of using the old election interference thing, and I think Dan, we wouldn't want to interfere with your the election at all. But finally, he agrees to come back at 5:30 and meet at Untermeyer's office. And Dan wants him to bring Tersh there, but as they're leaving, Kenny's like, "You get 3 more guys, we could get you a pallbearer."
No. That's the kind of hard-boiled dialogue you get from the mixer in this episode. A total political operative.
Yeah.
In the classic, like machine political operative.
Yes.
Even though he appears to be the entire machine.
Yes.
Him and Bowers.
I'm sure Santa Louisa has a machine.
Yeah. Yeah, they must.
Yeah. And Tersh is like in town, kind of stumbling around drunk. And struggles to remove a newspaper from a box.
One of the most unbelievable things in this episode is how he got through a game of handball, if that's really true.
Yeah.
I'm surprised he made it to the court.
Yeah. But the newspaper, which is Billy D's newspaper, the Herald, Santa Louisa Herald, has a picture on the front page of Hewitt. Mm-hmm. And so...
murder suspect nabbed.
Yes, murder suspect. Billy D probably didn't write that article. And I think he's already said, he thinks Kenny's got someone on the payroll at the Herald.
Yeah. Something else that Santa Louisa has, a thriving newspaper.
Yes. And in Untermeyer's office, Dan comes in, and Merrill's already there with Kenny, and they've covered the basics, which doesn't make Dan very happy. And, he's like, he has to consider that she was a threat to the father because of the blackmail potential, whoever the father is. And the Merrill leaves, and Dan goes out, or before that, Untermeyer tells Dan, charge Hewitt or let him go. But he's sort of, I kind of like that because he's almost like giving him permission without giving him permission.
Yeah.
He does a lot of that.
Right.
Like, well, I'm not telling you can do this, but you can do this.
Yeah.
And Dan, he's angry. He's at his desk, and Tersh stumbles in. He's like, I want to see, he wants to see Hewitt, right?
Yeah, and they're like, how may I help you, Mr. Merrill?
Yeah.
He gets this real casual reception, He's stumbling in like he said.
And right as that's happening, Charlie is bringing Hewitt down for another interrogation. And Tersh socks him in the face.
Oh, yes.
And then after they get everyone separated, Dan socks his desk.
Oh, yeah. And there's there's one episode where he actually broke his hand or something and had to
he has
shooting.
There were 2 episodes where he has a bandage on. And
so
one of them, he's just like, it's one of the I've seen other shows where where someone has a broken foot or something.
Yeah.
What happened to your foot? They make an inside joke about it.
Right.
I think in that he's just like, I hit something.
One of the stunts that Bert couldn't pull off was slamming a desk of all things.
Yes.
It's not quite. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's not quite the level of Columbo slamming Leonard Nimoy's desk with that clock thing.
No.
But it's pretty cool.
Yeah. He kicks it and he hits it.
Yeah.
But, he doesn't shove everything off it.
No.
Maybe people hadn't figured that one out yet.
Yeah, that was still to come.
I don't know if I've brought that up before, but has anyone ever done that in real life?
I've never
shoved everything off their desk in anger.
Yeah, I've never seen it. Not on especially on their own desk.
Yeah, it's always your own desk.
Yeah, and you rarely see the scene where everybody else walks out, and then they got to pick everything up.
Yeah.
Sheepishly put it back and sort out the way you had things. No, I've never seen that.
No, I mean probably good you haven't, but I've never done that.
No, I've certainly never done it. To me,
I probably have hit a desk or something, pounded something.
No, I'd be thinking about the pain of putting everything back together, or maybe I have cool things on my desk. I don't want to break them.
Although the ink blotter seems good for that. For that, that's maybe the only reason to have one of those.
I think you're right. Yes.
Anyway, Act 3, we're in the second interrogation, and Hewitt's being a little more honest about things now. He says, "Yeah, I followed the girl, and then this guy came and knocked me out.
Yeah,
harder than he'd ever been hit before." But he remembers, and it is a little dweird since we saw what he heard of the phone call.
Yeah,
there was no mention of anyone's name.
No, I missed. I didn't hear it.
But somehow McAdams, and so Dan sends Joe to Billings, Montana, to check up on her background, and
that's a pretty big assignment for Joe.
Yeah,
get on a plane and go to Billings, Montana.
Right. And see if the baby's black.
Yes, he doesn't say it quite that bluntly, but that's
yeah. What does he say?
He says Joe's the baby's he says something like, well, the baby's only 4 or 5 months old. What am I supposed to find out about him?
Yeah.
Like he was supposed to interrogate him or something.
Yeah.
But he doesn't know the information that some of the other information we know.
Right,
So,
yeah.
Well, you can start by seeing what color it is.
Right. Yeah.
I think he says.
That's right.
Yeah. I did like that, like the incredulous, right? Well, what am I supposed to? He's only 4 or 5 months old.
I want to see that scene, Ned.
Yeah.
Who's your dad? Yeah. Blink once if it's Tersh.
I can't get anything out of this kid. He's a tough nut to crack.
I want to go back to making lists. So it's nighttime, and Dan goes to the Herald and finds McAdams there. And McAdams is also a little more forthcoming this time.
Yes. Now, okay, here is the scene here's one of the scene where so the stuff I mentioned about the generation gap and the super condescension, it also plays out when they bring racial issues into it. And this scene is very much an example of that.
Yeah. So he explains that he was supposed to go pick her up and his car broke down, and that again his paranoia about Kenny having someone in the office, and Dan's like, well, I think you were in love with her too or something, and there we go. The black man hung up on the white girl. And Dan figures out that McAdams is the one who brought her back. He thinks to expose Merrill, and it's like, you've got a girl killed. That's great. And there's a little bit of that, he's like, Merrill's gonna take away all the civil rights progress that have happened.
Yeah,
and that's his motivation.
Right, and he's
it's good motivation. Yeah.
But it's like when he's saying to Dan, when he's like, "Oh, that's heavy."
Yeah,
breaks me down. But yeah, so he's pretty much admitting to trying to set up this smear.
Right.
Which is big moment here.
Yeah. And then later, Joe calls from Montana, where it's snowing. Lucky Joe. And
I don't think Quinn Martin actually had him go to Montana
to
shoot that scene.
I don't think so.
I think the snow is enough.
Yeah. He just sent him up to Big Bear. Go stand in a window. And Joanne had come back to California to get some money, a payoff. And the baby is blonde and blue-eyed, just like Tersh. And the weird thing is, she named it Lawrence Merrill.
Dun, dun.
Yeah. At the campaign office, Fred tells them that because his job's not worth it. or it's not, he's not getting paid enough to keep secrets, that they stashed Tersh on a drunk farm.
Yeah.
I like that term.
Drunk farm.
Drunk farm. And they go talk to him, and he didn't know she was pregnant, and, he was, oh, we never got past first base. And then
Yeah.
they tell him the name, and he gets hysterical. It's like, Lawrence Merrill the Fourth. There's another one. Another Lawrence. So, for Dan and Charlie, this is a big reveal that the gubernatorial candidate is the actual father.
For me, too.
Yeah.
I got to say, I think Lori hit on this very early in the episode. She
always
threw that
suspicious of those
Yes.
things.
Yes.
So there's something else? Oh, yeah. A current show.
Yes.
She picked out the paternity. But it turns out it's not a surprise to Untermeyer because Merrill already told him.
I like this too. It's actually kind of funny that he's pretty nonchalant about already knowing it.
And, Dan is rightfully angry about that. And he thinks he's protecting Merrill. Mm-hmm. And Untermeyer's, I'm protecting you.
Yeah.
So that part was interesting. That was another one where I thought, they know they've got a special detective here. He doesn't want him to get crushed by the machine.
It's a good scene. They have, in some ways, their relationship could be considered a little cliched, but scenes like this, it plays out in interesting ways sometimes, like you said, and it's something like, there's something there if the show could have continued. Mm-hmm. I really think this show could have improved. Yeah. And really been something really good. Not that it isn't entertaining to watch, but I like the scenes with them, is what I'm trying to say. Even though it's kind of a standard authority relationship, but there's hints of other things, and it's well played. Yeah. So they go out to the Merrill house, and Kenny's talking to them because Merrill's in some meeting or something, and Dan's like, well, Kenny's explaining that, he's the one that really wants this. He's built up all the way up to this, and he's the one who knows everything you need to know. Kind of like Merrill's just like a stuffed shirt or a puppet. Mm-hmm. Or he's got the raw material, but, he doesn't really know how to do it. Yeah. I know how to do it. So it's all about the power. And Dan says that, would you go as far as murder? And Kenny gets steamed. There's a brief scene of Tersh driving, and then Merrill comes into the office. He's not happy. Fred comes in and explains that Tersh beat up an orderly and stole a car and is on his way there. and that they find out that Fred had told where he was, and that's why he's so angry. And he immediately fires Fred. I laughed out loud at that. Just like, I can't have people like you around here. Yeah. Leave. All right. Get people like you, cooperating with cops. And Merrill's saying that, that Joanne wouldn't be a blackmailer. Anyone who knew her would know that. Yeah, and the mixer's like, oh, no, she's she's a great woman. She'd never do that, Yeah, boss. Whatever you say, boss. And Merrill's like, didn't even know when she was pregnant until she died. Of course, I guess Untermeyer has to make. I don't know how he even found out. Yeah. And she supposedly was coming for $10,000. I guess Kenny reveals that, and he's like, I'd have given her 10 times that. Yeah. Kenny says she got paid at the bus stop. Turns out he sent Fred to do that. Yeah, and one thing, the word abortion is thrown out. Yes, here, it is. Which is, pretty rare for TV at the time. So they sort of like bring it up. Yeah. And then Dan and Charlie bolt out the door. And outside, Tersh is pulling in as Fred is pulling out. So he can't get out, but he immediately jumps out of the car and starts shooting at Dan and Charlie. And that leads to, again, no car chase, but a heck of a foot chase. Yeah, some cool dives and sort of hurtling over fences. They're chasing. They climb over like a brick fence, and they're running through a field, and there's a little fence, and Dan uses it to leap onto him. Leap number 1. Yes. They fight a little bit, and Fred escapes, and Dan leaps on him again, and they roll down the banks of the LA River, or the Santa Louisa River, excuse me. And they're fighting there, and Fred gets out again, and he wades into the water, and Dan, for a third time, leaps on him and finally gets him. I believe this may be that injury that I was talking about. Oh, yeah? I think it was Peter Brown that was injured, and he sort of explained what had happened and how they had it set a certain way, and there was like a gust of wind that moved him slightly differently. So he didn't blame Burt Reynolds for it, but I think this is one of the injuries that actually happened. I think. But yeah, what a great sequence, and one of my favorite moves is that flying tackle, like his patented move, and to see it 3 times in this one sequence, I was thrilled by that. It's a very Jack Kirby Captain America kind of move. Yeah, it is. It is. All it needs is some Stan Lee dialogue. Yeah. Allez-y.
Alley-oop.
Yeah, it's great. Bert clearly loves doing that.
Yes.
Because they always find a way to
I know.
get it.
He's like, leaps off balconies.
Yeah.
And all sorts of things. And then, epilogue, which is pretty much just Kenny feeling sorry for himself.
You get would-be Governor Merrill's like poignant, like, no, nobody wins here. We're all losers.
Yes, that's right.
Which is sort of funny. And then this great exchange between Dan August and Kenny.
Right. And Kenny's just like, you worked 13 years and the lowest cog in the wheel. Right?
Yeah.
Ruins it for you.
Powers.
Yeah. And he's like, now I got nothing.
And Dan's like,
At least you're alive.
Yeah, you're still alive, Kenny.
Yeah, but who cares?
And he starts like cackling.
Yeah. He's in politics. He should know it'll come around again.
It was a very weird thing. I mean, to me, it's an example of sometimes like the show has troubles with tone.
Yeah.
I think they were going for something here, and like they didn't quite hit the grace notes that they were trying to in this. But it is funny because like it's like, yeah, he says that. I respect trying to get the cynicism, but but who cares? And then just the way he laughs at it, it's like, I don't know. There's something about it didn't quite hit me quite right. But you can see why the Mixter liked this role. He got this and that other scene like in the Merrill house before, where he's like explaining, and talking about nothings and telling Burt Reynolds he's just a cop, and so he gets some juicy stuff here.
Yeah, I think it's a really good showcase for him.
Yeah.
Yeah, he gets to be squirrely. He gets to be tough. He gets to be cynical. It's a good showing for the Mixter.
It is, yeah. I very much enjoyed it. I think of all these like guest stars, I think David Soul, Billy D. Williams, even Harrison Ford, they're a little young.
Yeah.
The Mixter, I think, is does the best with what he's given.
Yeah, and that Andy's guy, he's good as Merrill.
Yeah, he's we didn't really get into that, but I think the way he's playing it, he's sincere.
Yeah.
Like it turns out, he may be a little bit of a jerk in some ways, and firing Bowers before he knew. That turns out to be a pretty good decision, actually.
Yeah.
But he seems to be sincere in a lot of things. I mean, you kind of go through expecting, well, maybe he is just, maybe there's something really shady. And I'm not excusing some of his indiscretions.
Right.
But he had the affection for the woman, and he sort of wanted to do the right thing, I guess. I'm hedging a little bit because now that I think about it, I mean, what did you expect him to do?
Right.
We met his lovely wife, Adele.
That's right.
On the tarmac there. I hate to think of her being hurt by this.
Right.
But yeah, he was good. Some really good supporting roles. I think that guy's been in tons of stuff. I know. Yeah. Quinn Martin Productions used a lot of like recurring actors. Unfortunately, I don't think Billy D. Williams and Harrison Ford were two of them.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've seen them in any other ones, or David Soul, but what a cast. Now, I think one of the one of the things I think that Dan August does, I think it has a habit of telegraphing who the killer is.
Yes.
Like in certain ways. And that's a recurring theme throughout the show. I think they could do a little stronger job of hiding that. Like, and sometimes, I won't say specific episodes, but you'll see like a new character, or like a character you haven't seen before in a prominent position, and right away a red flag goes up because we haven't seen this person before. And there's something shady involved in there. I think this episode, I think it telegraphed the killer a little bit.
Yeah, I guess so. I think I wasn't one of the weird things. Either the killer tends to be the big guest star, or like in this case, it's someone not even listed in the main guest stars.
Right. There was a reaction, like kind of a subtle reaction.
Yeah. That
I thought, oh, but this guy had something to do with it. And I should mention too, this is like after watching a bunch of episodes and kind of knowing how the show works, that kind of led me to think that. I'm not patting myself on the back for that. Okay. But I do think they have a habit of telegraphing the killer, which is a contrast because like in other shows, like we know, like in other shows of that era, like Columbo being the most famous, we'd see what it was, so there wouldn't be a big mystery for it.
Right.
I mean, obviously the big mystery is not the most important thing, but the way the show is structured, it's meant to be something like the reveal is supposed to have. It doesn't have as much heft as it could be normally, I think, because of the way because the scripts aren't strong enough.
Yes. I wanted to say that in real life, Ronald Reagan was governor until from 1967 to 1975.
Oh, Ronald Reagan, the actor?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I forgot about that.
So, as far as we know, this did not have an effect on because I mean, it seemed like he would have been running in the same party as Reagan, based on aspersions cast at him.
Yes. Well, they do make it sound. Was it a general campaign or was it a primary campaign? Because I was thinking there was something, the way they did something that made me think it was a primary campaign. So that would make sense. So
maybe
The Gipper might have gotten a break here.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. The mysteries are not always the strongest. As entertaining as the show is, I think there are some weaknesses. The mysteries that, Bert is not getting to be as charismatic as he's capable of, because that would, I think, override the weak mysteries.
Yeah.
If you have, a really interesting character, maybe you can get away with the stories not being quite as good.
You're right.
But like I said, I like the location shooting. I like the general feel of it, and I like the attempts to make it, even if they're not doing a great job of portraying it, but at least make it contemporary to the times and show the world, some version of the world as it was.
I do think the show plays it very safe, which kind of hurts it when it does that. Those kind of things, like it presents them and then does a very tame job of introducing. But at least it has it. So
Right.
I agree with you. Yeah, it's making the attempt. It's not executing it quite as well as it could be, and it's not always committed to it. But at least it's there.
Yeah.
Now, one other thing I want to say. This is probably me speaking 50 years after it. But one thing I was asking when I was watching a lot of this is, where's the violence? Because I'd heard of this being a violent show and had the reputation.
Yeah.
And yes, the show's built around murders, and you got Burt and his chases. But to me, I expected something a lot more brutal
Right.
than it wound up being. In a lot of episodes, you maybe get a fist fight. But like Starsky and Hutch a few years later, you could see that as being more like violent, and it got the reputation. Now, and one of the reasons I thought this was because I had gotten this when I knew we were going to do Dead in August. I acquired this Philadelphia Inquirer TV Week from January 1971. And there's an interesting profile here of Burt Reynolds with a cool picture of Burt. This, I guess, was a regular column called Screening TV by Harry Harris, if that is his real name. Any of our Philadelphia listeners, if you happen to know Harry Harris, you can verify that. But it's interesting because the article starts out emphasizing his Native American heritage, and then it gets into like Burt Reynolds defending the violence of the show.
Yeah.
And he's saying, well, I call it action,
Right.
But it's interesting. Let me, if I may, let me read the first how this begins. So it goes, "Lo, the not so poor Indian, a black and blue red man, that's fractionally Cherokee Burt Reynolds, buffeted by fate and buffeting back, but no longer vociferously on the warpath." Then it says, "A former college football star and professional stuntman, Blorton Burt has learned to lessen the pain of even the most kaploppy falls." Kaploppy in italics with an exclamation mark. "The once thin-skinned redskin has become so mellow a fellow that he even has kind words for such former scalpies as Marlon Brando and Darren McGavin."
This is horrible.
Yes. Okay. So then they talk about Dan August and how the ratings are in trouble, and then they mention him playing Hawk, which is a show that it failed before. And Burt Reynolds talks about it, and he's kind of like got a blasé attitude about the ratings. But he says, "This time I have some insurance, 26 firm weeks, a generous salary." It says in parentheses, reputedly $20,000 per episode. Whoa. And he says, "And maybe we can pull it off unless suddenly everyone is against the old Indian." And he talks a little bit about Hawk more, and he says, "I just wish they'd let August be a tougher cop. I don't feel all the criticism of violence on television is justified. People want action. The most highly rated thing on the air is professional football." He says, "Maybe the people who are against violence want us to hit each other with a flower." And then he says, he makes a comparison to like Hawaii Five-0, which seems to be one of the things he was a little bit bitter about, being put up against, Hawaii Five-0, which was a very popular show. He kind of goes on about that, and he's talking more about the violence, and he says, if they watch, Jack Lord shoot somebody, kids don't do the same thing as that. And he says, audience are starving for the kind of action they can't get on TV. If 4 kids die from dope, and then I just arrest the guy responsible and don't clobber him, the audience is cheated. And so, after chasing him for 59 minutes, am I. So he's going on, and then he talks about being a stunt. The audience knows it and responds to it. It's not hard to fall off a building. The hard part is to fall off and not get hurt. And he talks again about stuntman and everything, and it's pretty interesting. And then he goes on about Darren McGavin and says, he kind of regrets how things ended with him and Darren McGavin, and he says he was probably looking out for him, and some of it was probably my fault. But Burt Reynolds, I guess, left the show Riverboat. He had problems with him.
Oh, okay.
And then they get into the Marlon Brando stuff, which is interesting because yes,
and Brando apparently hated Burt because
yes, apparently people were comparing the two, and I think in Ralph Sinensky's blog, I think and some other places I've seen people talk about Burt Reynolds having a real Marlon Brando thing at this time of Dan August, which is interesting because Burt Reynolds talks about, he says, "There's not much talk about my looking like Brando now that he's shorter, balder, and fatter. He's just as talented, but he needs a good picture." He says, "I met him only once and it was a terrible experience. I walked into a coffee house with a date and a guy grabbed me and yelled at me, 'He's here.' I thought it had to be Albert Schweitzer." He pulled me by the arm over where Brando was sitting with the rider and kept saying, "Isn't the resemblance fantastic, Marlon? Isn't it incredible?" Marlon sat there, a fishy eye in my thrust-out hand, and I said, "Blip you," and walked out. I was so mad that I drove out to his house. I wanted to tell him I'm not after a job. I stayed there 4 hours, but he never came home. It destroyed me. I had worked so hard for years never to emulate him in the slightest way, even a gesture. Now I don't care. I don't think about it. And that's how the article ends.
Blip you.
Yeah. I mean, talk about frank language.
Yeah.
But, I mean, where to begin with this article?
Yeah.
You know, this is amazing. And the whole thing, you know, has even more stuff. But
And not even a mention of Ned Romero being a Native American.
no, that's right. Yeah. I mean, it starts one way, goes another way, and then ends with this Marlon Brando anecdote with Bert perhaps protesting too much about this whole thing. And, you know, so I don't get a lot of the violence in the show.
No.
But part of it is just, you know, well, we're used to a lot more violence now. The other thing is, like, again, on that Sinitsky blog, somebody, I think it's the director himself, Ralph Sinitsky, says that the producer, Anthony Spinner, told him, you got to watch out with Bert. Otherwise he's going to try to do little bits of business and everything because he thinks he's all charming. And he said, and if there's one thing Burt Reynolds doesn't have, it's charm. Like, what? And which is, again, funny because you watch the show and I don't see Burt Reynolds trying to do little bits of business.
No.
If anything, he's going the other way with it.
Because they're keeping him from it.
Yeah. Well, maybe. Yeah. But
Norman Feld does bits of business. Cigars and stuff.
yeah.
I mean, there aren't many shootouts. There are, fisticuffs.
The car chase I don't necessarily see as violence.
No, those aren't. And, I mean, the murders themselves sometimes, like, this one begins with the guy smacking her.
Yeah.
And the one with the heap, I think, is shot. See the violence, but it's shot violently.
Yeah.
It's like cut. It's kind of like the Psycho thing.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of like slasher movie type things where you see like the point of view, but then they cut. Yeah. And like the tableau of the crime scene in this one is pretty striking. Yeah. Like you said, it did suggest that there was something, you know, like some kind of sexual crime involved.
Yeah. And there's, you know, a fair amount of blood sometimes.
Yeah.
I think that pilot movie especially had a lot of blood.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I guess, after having done Starsky and Hutch.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know.
So, yeah, I don't see it as being an issue, I guess, when I'm watching it. I was a little disappointed. I was hoping for some more violence.
Right.
I'd like to see more fistfights with Burt Reynolds, frankly.
Once again, you know, it's 9:30, 10 o'clock show.
Yeah.
I don't think kids were watching in August.
No.
Burt might think that, but...
They were not.
Now, I think, I mean, that reference he made to 4 kids dying from, you know, heroin, that is a reference to an actual episode. I don't know if you saw that one, but...
I'm trying to think.
There's like high school kids overdosing.
Yeah, I don't know.
So, yeah.
Well, yeah, and you got to have you got to have Burt beat the guy up a little, or beat the responsible parties
Clobber
up a little bit.
Yeah.
Or else you're cheated.
All right, and he's cheated.
59 minutes.
He's cheated.
I'm cheated. Very candid Burt Reynolds in this interview.
Oh, yeah.
Good job by Harry Harris.
Yes.
You know, despite the shaky beginning of the article, he got a lot out of Burt.
Right.
That's interesting.
He's like, hey, you know, Burt, if it's okay, I'm going to start the article with some casual racism.
Yeah.
But then we'll get into talking about you.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Now, on Hawk, that was a big part of the character who's like Native American heritage.
Yeah.
And on Gunsmoke, he was playing a character that was part Cherokee.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting. There's the Brando stuff and the Cherokee stuff seemed to vanish as he became a big movie star, didn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it would only be stuff like the subject of self-deprecating jokes, maybe, but not like leading an article around it like this was.
Very quickly before we wrap this up, we already had this discussion off air a little bit, but was the toupee or not toupee? I'm pretty even before I read some information that I come down on the toupee side of things.
It's a toupee.
Yeah.
I've read too much to indicate that, yes, with people commenting on it. And apparently him joking about it. Burt Reynolds himself joking about it.
Yeah.
So, yes.
His hair is just so perfectly smooth sometimes.
Yeah.
Especially in the earlier. It seems to change a little bit. But
yeah, I think this episode was a little bit different than some of the earlier.
Although there's one where he's playing water polo.
Oh, I definitely haven't seen that one.
I think. This is one with Dabney Coleman in it.
Okay. Oh, wait a minute. I did see that one.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay,
yeah.
I remember that one.
So I guess he took it off for that.
Yeah.
like
a swim cap.
I mean, Deliverance, he can't.
Yeah.
I'm sure he wasn't wearing one then.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that was the weird one because 2 people you want to have mustaches didn't have mustaches.
That's right, yes.
Then, of course, the one with Ricardo Montalban, you had dueling toupees.
Right.
Yeah. And I don't know, Norman Fell, what do you think about it? I just assume he's wearing a toupee for some reason. I don't know why though.
I don't know now.
Yeah.
Now that you mention it, did we talk about that in Three's Company?
I don't think so.
Furley, we talked about.
Furley, well, yeah. I mean, the character is certainly wearing
Yes.
one.
Yes. You might be right, but Norman Fell just seemed to generally look like that for
Yes.
10 years as it was by this.
Right. Yeah.
I would certainly believe that, but I can't be sure right now.
Yeah.
I can't be sure.
And for people who are interested, there's an episode with a shirtless Richard Anderson. Not a shirtless Burt Reynolds.
No.
And a shirtless guest star. I mean, there are some shirtless, David Soul.
Yeah.
But Richard Anderson. All the actors
Yeah.
expect.
And he's like doing something. He's like working out.
Yeah, he's punching heavy bag.
Yeah. It's like, oh yeah, let's show off Richard a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we'll have some interesting candidates for best hair eventually, I guess, from this
Yes.
episode alone.
Yeah, possibly.
Should we have a best font category for the Dan August credits that you mentioned?
Maybe. Yeah. It's a cool font. It's just not.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But a lot of the Quinn Martin shows, they use functional,
Yeah.
striking but functional fonts.
Right. And I think, 1970, it's almost like I feel like a early 60s kind of look.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe mid 60s more than a psychedelic or anything like that.
Yeah,
You could see it just fits that sense of graphic design, I think.
I agree with that. Talking about Burt Reynolds, the last thing I think I have to say is, by all accounts, Burt Reynolds worked very hard.
Mm-hmm.
He really wanted this to be a hit. Did not cause trouble doing the own stunts. He did, but I've read multiple stories of him coming back to do pickups and just like doing things that a star wouldn't have to do.
Yeah.
But some people were saying that, like, he was kind of running the set.
Uh-huh.
Like actors would look at him and it annoyed some people. But he did promotions. He did publicity. He wasn't shy about it. And there's also like a cool clip from this era on the Dick Cavett show I found too that I'll put in the playlist. So I did find that fabled Johnny Carson, but he did other talk show appearances, and there's one with him and Carol Burnett that's pretty cool from this time frame. So
Okay.
so yeah, it's not 100% Burt that we'd get on the Golden Girls, but you get Burt the whole episode in this one.
Yeah.
You get a lot of Burt.
Exactly.
So don't get me wrong, I love having the Dan August episodes, and I'm really enjoying watching the show. And I do think, if given more time, I think the show could have been a lot better.
Yeah. And you know what else could make things a lot better?
What's
Joining our Facebook group.
Oh, yes. Beautiful.
Where you can talk about stuff like this all the time.
All the time. Please do.
Toupees, Burt Reynolds, mustaches, old shows.
Guest stars.
Guest stars.
We love guest stars.
Yeah. Quinn Martin shows.
Violence
Yeah.
on TV.
Right.
Just general violence. But
Yeah.
yeah, all this stuff. Come to Facebook. Look up Battle of the Network shows. It's very easy to join.
Yep.
Come and talk about this. We'd love to have you.
Check out the website. Every Sunday, Rick has a top 10 list. He's passed 300 already.
Oh, yes. Past
That's
300.
quite a feat.
Yes, that's 10 times as many as Dan August episodes.
That's right.
I work just as hard as Burt Reynolds did on that show on these top 10s, I tell you.
Yeah.
I do my own stunts when I'm writing them, too.
All right. That's Dan August.
This episode brought to you by the Santa Louisa Tourist Board. Santa Louisa, everything you need. This episode also brought to you by Kenny O'Malley, political consultant. Will do whatever it takes to win, except murder. He's not cool with that. This episode also brought to you by Cabbage. Chuck some at a politician today. Join us next time for another exciting episode of Battle of the Network shows. Learn more, leave feedback, and suggest future episodes at battleofthenetworkshows.com. Follow us on Twitter at BatNetShows, and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/battleofthenetworkshows. Special intros. Do you mean for me to read that aloud or just...
You don't have to say special intro now.
Okay. I do want to say Dan August to get in the mood, though. Dan August.